Hi guys, Dr. H here, your source of musculoskeletal care, and this is the last video of this 4-part series on the incredible health benefits of resistance training. This video is a little bit different. So what we're going to do in this video is talk about some few basic guidelines on starting a resistance training program so that you can benefit from all the great health effects of resistance training that we've talked about in the previous 3 videos. Quick disclaimer, bodies are unique, and often the best approach is a unique approach that's tailored to you. So we're not going to get too prescriptive in this video. We're going to be kind of generic, but these guidelines are applicable to most people in order to create a safe and effective resistance training program. So let's talk about that. So one of the biggest barriers to starting a resistance training program is there is a bit of a learning curve. Now, this is not unique to resistance or strength training. Any aerobic type of exercise that you're doing, swimming, running, cycling, all of that, these are things that should have learning curves. You should learn how to go and do those well. My clinic is full of people who thought they could just open their door one day and just start running, never looking into the best way to do it. And that ends up in injury. Well, it's the same thing for strength training. If you decide just to go to the gym and start slinging around weights with having no idea what you're doing or what you're trying to accomplish, you're probably going to risk injury. So the very first step you probably need to accomplish is finding the equipment you're going to need to do resistance training. Now, maybe some of you watching this video don't need to start with equipment. Body weight exercises might be perfectly fine for you. It's just not a very sustainable approach. As you eventually get stronger and stronger, the only way to really make body weight exercises continue to be challenging is to increase your number of repetitions. And so maybe you start out only able to do a few sets of 5 push-ups and you find that very challenging. Well, eventually you're going to be, doing, 50 push-ups or something like that a set. But the problem is at that point, you're not really training strength anymore. And remember from those first few videos, particularly the first one, it was strength that was that independent variable that decreased your risk of illness and death. So if you're not training strength, you're not going to get those same benefits. And doing something like 100 sit-ups or 50 push-ups is really training more muscular endurance and not so much strength. So as you get stronger and stronger, even if you start with body weight exercises, you're eventually going to need some type of equipment to increase the load on your muscles so that they're challenged within that sort of range that's going to increase their strength. So at this point, I do want to talk about a relatively strict rule of mine. Stay away from machines. You know what I'm talking about. You've gone to the gym, you see these machines that you sit down in, they usually isolate your joints to target a single muscle group or a single joint. And these just aren't great. And you'll see why as we talk about some more of the guidelines. But most importantly, locking your body into a position where you're isolating a certain joint puts you more at risk for injury than it does for benefit in the long term. Even machines that may seem more functional, like a leg press machine or what we call a Smith machine, which is a bar that sits on a track that you can do squats and stuff with while still having the stability of that track guiding the bar. These are still things I want you to stay away from. So what equipment should you use? Well, probably the best thing to use is free weights. This could be a barbell, which is great, sometimes not as practical, or dumbbells, which can be a little bit more practical. You could have dumbbells just sitting in a room at your house that you can do a lot of exercises with. Or you can have a complex setup that has like a squat rack and a bench and barbells and all of that at your house or at the gym. The point is you want something where you can increase the load that you have to move as your body gets stronger. So really, one of the best ways to start out might be doing one of those free trial memberships at a gym. Go to that gym, pick some dumbbells of a certain weight, and try to do an exercise with those dumbbells such that you could really only do, 5 or 6 repetitions per set. That is a pretty good weight for training strength. Figure out what weight that was and then buy yourself a pair of dumbbells at that weight and a few increments up so that as you get stronger, you can challenge those muscles with the higher weight. Alternatively, you could get a gym membership. Again, though, we're avoiding machines, so you're going to want to judge at your gym based on how many free weights they have. Do they have a lot of dumbbells? Do they have a lot of squat racks, bench setups? Things that will allow you to go to the gym and not have to, wait in a line of 60 people just to use a free weight. So now we'll talk a little bit about programming. I'll be honest with you, for the vast majority of you watching this video, you probably don't need any kind of special programming. Just getting your baseline strength up will help provide you a lot of those benefits that we talked about in the previous videos. If you are getting to the point where you need to have specialized programming in order to progress in your strength, you're probably at the point where you should be doing independent research or finding a coach or something like that to help you. The one thing I will touch on, the one general rule I will provide that we already kind of mentioned, is sort of the rep set range. So because we're training specifically strength to get all these benefits, you are going to do relatively fewer repetitions with relatively heavier weight. So in other words, don't be taking, a very light weight and doing sets of 12 or 15. You're probably going to want to stick to around that 5 to 8 repetition range. And so you should be picking a weight that's challenging for you within that 5 to 8 repetition range. All right, last but certainly not least, let's talk about some basic guidelines for choosing the exercises that you do. I don't want to necessarily prescribe any specific exercises, though I will, but I'd rather provide you with some general guidelines that you can use to sort of choose your own exercises. First and foremost, the exercise should mimic the body's natural way of moving. There are a lot of reasons for this, but one of the biggest one is that your brain and your spinal cord don't work by saying, okay, this one muscle fire now. Rather, you have entire movement patterns that are sort of, for lack of a better word, stored in your spinal cord that your body executes or your brain executes and allows you to move. Well, that's the thing you want to mimic when you're trying to do strength training, because again, a big part of why we're doing this is to maintain our mobility and our functional abilities. So exercises that are really only firing one muscle, and again, this kind of goes back to machines, but think of something like a leg curl, right? Really only firing those hamstrings to lift a weight up. These are not going to be the most effective and the best exercises. Again, that's not how your body really functions, and so training it like that may lead to more harm than good in terms of things like muscle imbalances and motor firing patterns. So what's an example of an exercise that does meet this criteria? Well, probably the best one you can do is just the squat. And really, the squat is probably the best resistance-based exercise that you can do. It trains all the muscles that your body engages anytime you're going to do anything strenuous. Most of your body's power comes from these deep core muscles, not your abs. Things like the muscles that are in your low back, your glutes, your hamstrings, your adductors, your quadriceps, the muscles that sort of surround your legs and your pelvis. That's where you generate your power. Even if you're using your arms to lift something heavy, a lot of that power is still coming from that core area there. And pretty much every one of those muscles gets trained in the motion like the squat. Now, obviously, we don't tend to squat much these days, just in our everyday life, thanks to the invention of chairs. But it's still a very natural and functional movement that every human body should be able to do. So another example of a great exercise for your resistance training program is something like the overhead press. It meets all the guidelines. It's a complex movement. It involves multiple joints and something that you can do with free weights. But the problem with exercises like the squat and the overhead press is these are things that our bodies don't really know how to naturally do well. It's something that you do have to learn. And I know that the information online can be incredibly overwhelming and frankly sometimes contradictory. I'll put a couple links below on some videos that I found just searching YouTube on how to do things like the squat and the overhead press, and I've watched these videos and they sync up pretty well with what I would tell patients to do. They're a little bit more complex and involved than you might need at first, but again, it's better to be more detailed than less in the beginning because you don't want to form and ingrain bad habits when doing these kind of exercises. And while these videos are focused on using a barbell, the same principles apply if you're using dumbbells or even if you're just starting out with things like body weight. And for anyone who wants to get super nerdy about it, here's a study below that's a great read for learning all the different elements of the exercise like the squat. So to recap, you want to be doing multi-jointed movements that mimic real-life function of muscles. And I've given you a couple of good examples of this, but I do want to touch on some exercises that are not the best. So one type of exercise you may want to avoid is something like a bicep curl. Now I know big biceps are desirable for some, but again, this motion of repetitively bringing something from here to here is not something that we do in natural movements or in everyday life. Biceps, like a lot of the muscles in your body, are actually meant to be stabilizers. In other words, if you're carrying something heavy, they keep you from dropping it. And so if you're going to train biceps, which again, I don't think you really need to, it's pretty low yield, but you would want to do so in a way that mimics that function. So exercises where you're carrying something heavy, for example, with your arms kind of pinning that object to your chest would be a great way to train the biceps. Crunches and sit-ups are another example of exercises that mistrain your muscles. Your abdominal muscles are the front aspect of your core. They are stabilizing muscles. If I'm pushing something above my head, they keep me from falling and bending too far backwards. And so that's how you want to train them. I always tell my patients, you want your abs to be strong, long. And so exercises that keep your abdominal muscles either in the neutral position or even slightly elongated are going to be much better than exercises like crunches that are trying to get those muscles to be strong in a shortened, contracted position. And sort of the last thing I would say is if you're doing any kind of exercise for your lower body, you want it to be closed chain. In other words, you want your feet flat on the floor. Avoid exercises that train your legs that have your feet off the floor. Again, things like leg curls or leg extensions. Driving into the floor to create power is a very important motor function for your body, and so you don't want to waste time with exercises that aren't using that particular function. So let's summarize with the basic guidelines. Use free weights. Use relatively heavier weights for relatively fewer repetitions to perform these exercises that are multi-jointed and mimic more natural movements. If you're doing a type of resistance training program that matches fairly close to all those guidelines, you're going to be just fine. If you get to the point where you need to be more specific, then you're probably at the point where it's worth doing a little bit of self-study or hiring something like a strength training coach. All right, so that brings us to the end of this video series. So hopefully I've convinced you of the great importance of doing things like resistance training. After discussing all the research, after all the science talk, I really do believe it boils down to one simple thing, which is our bodies are built to do work with our muscles. And when they're not able to do that, bad things happen. When they are able to do that, good things happen. So go start, or maybe restart, your resistance training program. And please, 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 don't ever stop. All right, so that's all for now. Until the next time, keep moving.